Best practices for using Docker Hub for CI/CD. According to the 2020 JetBrains Developer Survey, 44% of developers are now using some form of continuous integration and deployment with Docker containers. We understand that a large number of developers have got this set up using Docker Hub as their container registry for part of their workflow. This guide contains some best practices for doing this and provides guidance on how to get started. We have also heard feedback that given the changes Docker introduced relating to network egress and the number of pulls for free users, that there are questions around the best way to use Docker Hub as part of CI/CD workflows without hitting these limits. This guide covers best practices that improve your experience and uses a sensible consumption of Docker Hub which mitigates the risk of hitting these limits, and contains tips on how to increase the limits depending on your use case. Inner and outer loops. To get started, one of the most important things when working with Docker and any CI/CD is to understand when you need to test with the CI, and when you can do this locally. At Docker, we think about how developers work in terms of their inner loop and their outer loop. Before you think about optimizing your CI/CD, it is important to think about your inner loop and how it relates to the outer loop. We know that most users don't prefer debugging through the C. Therefore, it is better if your inner loop and outer loop are as similar as possible. We recommend that you run unit tests as part of your Docker build command by adding a target for them in your Docker file. This way, as you are making changes and rebuilding locally, you can run the same unit tests you would run in the CI on your local machine using a simple command. The blog post Go Development with Docker is a great example of how you can use tests in your Docker project and reuse them in the CI. This also creates a shorter feedback loop on issues and reduces the amount of pulls and builds your CI needs to do. Optimizing CI/CD deployments. Once you get into your actual outer loop and Docker Hub, there are a few things you can do to get the most of your CI and deliver the fastest Docker experience. First and foremost, stay secure. When you are setting up your CI, ensure you are using a Docker Hub access token, rather than your password. Note: you can create new access tokens from your security page on Docker Hub. Once you have created access tokens and have added it to a secrets store on your platform, you need to consider when to push and pull in your CI/CD, along with where from, depending on the change you are making. The first thing you can do to reduce the build time and reduce your number of calls is make use of the build cache to reuse layers you have already pulled. You can do this on many platforms by using build's caching functionality and whatever cache your platform provides. For example, see optimizing the GitHub Actions workflow using build cache. The other change you may want to make is only have your release images go to Docker Hub. This would mean setting up functions to push your PR images to a more local image store to be quickly pulled and tested, rather than promoting them all the way up to production. Next steps. We know there are a lot more tips and tricks for using Docker and CI, however, we think these are some of the important things, considering the recent Docker Hub rate limit updates. Note: if you are still experiencing issues with pull limits after you are authenticated, you can consider upgrading to a Docker subscription. Configure GitHub Actions. This page guides you through the process of setting up a GitHub Actions CI/CD pipeline with Docker containers. Before setting up a new pipeline, we recommend that you take a look at Ben's blog on CI/CD best practices. This guide contains instructions on how to 1. Use a sample Docker project as an example to configure GitHub Actions. 2. Set up the GitHub Actions workflow. 3. Optimize your workflow to reduce the number of pull requests and the total build time. And finally, 4. Push only specific versions to Docker Hub. Set up a Docker project. Let's get started. This guide uses a simple Docker project as an example. The Simple Whale demo repository contains an Nginx Alpine image. You can either clone this repository, or use your own Docker project. Before we start, ensure you can access Docker Hub from any workflows you create. To do this, 1. Add your Docker ID as a secret to GitHub. Navigate to your GitHub repository and click Settings greater than Secrets greater than New Secret. 2. Create a new secret with the name Docker Hub username and your Docker ID as value. 3. Create a new personal access token. To create a new token, go to Docker Hub Settings and then click New Access Token. 4. Let's call this token SimplyHLEC. Now, add this personal access token as a second secret into the GitHub Secrets IE with the name Docker Hub Access Token. 1. Set up the GitHub Actions workflow. In the previous section, we created a path and added it to GitHub to ensure we can access Docker Hub from any workflow. Now, let's set up our GitHub Actions workflow to build and store our images in Hub. We can achieve this by creating 2 Docker actions. 1. The first action enables us to log into Docker Hub using the secrets we stored in the GitHub repository. 2. The second one is the build and push action. In this example, let us set the push flag to true as we also want to push. We'll then add a tag to specify to always go to the latest version. Lastly, we'll echo the image digest to see what was pushed. To set up the workflow, 1. Go to your repository in GitHub and then click Actions greater than New Workflow. 2. Click Set up a workflow yourself and add the following content. First, we will name this workflow. Name, CI to Docker Hub. Then, we will choose when we run this workflow. In our example, we are going to do it for every push against the main branch of our project. On. Push. Branches. Now, we need to specify what we actually want to happen within our action. We are going to add our build one and select that it runs on the latest Ubuntu instances available. Jobs. Build. Runs on Ubuntu latest. Now, we can add the steps required. The first one checks out our repository under $GitHub Workspace, so our workflow can access it. The second is to use our path and username to log into Docker Hub. The third is the builder. The action uses BuildKit under the hood through a simple buildX action which we will also set up. Now, let the workflow run for the first time and then tweak the Docker file to make sure the CI is running and pushing the new image changes. Optimizing the workflow. Next, let's look at how we can optimize the GitHub Actions workflow through Build Cache. This has 2 main advantages. 1. Build Cache reduces the build time as it will not have to re-download all of the images, and 2. It also reduces the number of pulls we complete against Docker Hub. We need to make use of GitHub Cache to make use of this. Let us set up a builder with a build cache. First, we need to set up cache for the builder. In this example, let us add the path and keys to store this under using GitHub Cache for this. And lastly, after adding the builder and build cache snippets to the top of the actions file, we need to add some extra attributes to the build and push step. This involves setting up the builder to use the output of the build step, and then using the cache we set up earlier for it to store to and to retrieve. Now, run the workflow again and verify that it uses the build cache. Push tag versions to Docker Hub. Earlier, we learned how to set up a GitHub Actions workflow to a Docker project, how to optimize the workflow by setting up a builder with build cache. Let's now look at how we can improve it further. We can do this by adding the ability to have tag versions behave differently to all commits to master. This means only specific versions are pushed, instead of every commit updating the latest version on Docker Hub. You can consider this approach to have your commits go to a local registry to then use in nightly tests. By doing this, you can always test what is latest while reserving your tag versions for release to Docker Hub. This involves two steps. 1. Modifying the GitHub workflow to only push commits with specific tags to Docker Hub. 2. Setting up a GitHub Actions file to store the latest commit as an image in the GitHub registry. First, let us modify our existing GitHub workflow to only push to Hub if there's a particular tag. This ensures that the main CI will only trigger if we tag our commits with VNN. Let's test this. For example, run the following command: git tag-av1.0.2 git push origin v1.0.2. Now, go to GitHub and check your actions. Now, let's set up a second GitHub action file to store our latest commit as an image in the GitHub container registry. You may want to do this to 1. Run your nightly tests or recurring tests, or 2. To share work-in-progress images with colleagues. Let's clone our previous GitHub action and add back in our previous logic for all pushes. This will mean we have two workflow files, our previous one and our new one we will now work on. To authenticate against the GitHub container registry, use the GitHub token for the best security and experience. Now let's change the Docker Hub login with the GitHub container registry one. Remember to change how the image is tagged. The following example keeps latest as the only tag. However, you can add any logic to this if you prefer. Now, we will have two different flows, one for our changes to master, and one for our pull requests. Next, we need to modify what we had before to ensure we are pushing our PRs to the GitHub registry rather than to Docker Hub. Conclusion. In this guide, you have learned how to set up GitHub Actions workflow to an existing Docker project, optimize your workflow to improve build times and reduce the number of pull requests, and finally, we learned how to push only specific versions to Docker Hub. Next steps. You can now consider setting up nightly tests against the latest tag, test each PR, or do something more elegant with the tags we are using and make use of the git tag for the same tag in our image. To look at how you can do one of these, or to get a full example on how to set up what we have accomplished today, check out Chad's repo which runs you through this and more details on our latest GitHub action.